This is too cool. 10 years ago, a good friend of mine, Andreas, he showed me my very first TED Talk, and I thought to myself, what would a life look like in pursuit of peace building, thinking differently about it enough that I could be invited to share my ideas at a TED event. And for me, this is just an absolute dream come true. So thanks for having me. I'm going to be talking about effectiveness in peacemaking today, also peace building. My journey began when I was approximately 20, 21 years old. I started doing a little bit of traveling, and I came back to the United States really convicted by the idea that I could think differently about approaches to peacemaking. And so I went to my mentor at the time, and I said, this is what I want to do with my life. And he said, well, what do you know about peacemaking? What do you know about peace? I said, not a whole lot. And he said, well, then leave and don't come back until you do. So as a young person, every time I would get enough money, gather together to buy a ticket and get a plan, get a contact, I would go to a different war-torn country or conflict-affected country and spend time learning, just observing, listening, finding out what people were doing to try to make life better, to pursue peace around the world in conflict-affected areas. And so I would find myself in the back of a lot of pickup trucks because I didn't have a whole lot of money. And slept in various locations that were open to me by volunteers, and I got to be on the ground and among local populations experiencing conflict and thinking and desiring peace for themselves. Eventually, I went to enough places and experienced enough work being done that I launched my own efforts in different places and eventually landed a job at the Carter School here at George Mason, which has been an absolute dream come true for me as I lead the Political Leadership Academy there and our locally led peacemaking project. And I direct Innovations in Peacebuilding International. I've traveled to 67 countries, launched peace efforts in Iraq, Afghanistan, Uganda, Burundi, and the DRC. And I've conducted research elsewhere in Kurdistan, Jordan, Tunisia, Europe, and other places. However, I've also been through a lot of stuff. Suspected as a spy in Lebanon, suspected of business fraud in Kurdistan, scammed by Turkish mobsters, experienced several Taliban attacks in Afghanistan, an armed group coordinated armed group attack on our village in the DRC. I ran out of money on my way back from Iraq and had to sleep under a bench in New York waiting for my flight, and got severely ill with an infection in Colombia. Why did I tell you all this? Peace practice will be learned the hard way. But it leads to something known as peace praxis, where we blend ideas, scholarship, and practice, where ideas inform practice, and practice informs ideas. My experience also led me to digging deeper in an attempt to understand what is known as peacemaking hybridity, where internationals interact with locals as they work together to come up with more effectiveness in peace building. Praxis, the blending of theory and practice. Or, as I like to say, knowledge without passion can be incredibly boring. But passion without knowledge can be incredibly dangerous, as I've seen personally, and I'm sure you've seen too. But why praxis in peace? Scholarship must inform practice, and practice must inform scholarship. As I was conducting research in Jordan among a Syrian refugee population there, I was walking down the road one day and spotted this young man sitting on the side of the road. And he was waiting, what I later learned, for a truck that pulled up right next to me and right next to him. And without saying anything, this young man stood up, went to the back of the truck, and began unloading bags of rice and food that were as big as he was. And I said, "What's this guy doing?" to a person who was working with me from there. And he said, "This boy sits on the side of the road every day. He knows when the truck is coming, and he stands up, unloads the truck, and helps deliver the food to all of his people. This boy is a refugee from Syria, and he's doing what he can to bring peace and security to his own society. He's serving his community. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I was there as a scholar, but what I was witnessing was conflict resolution and the pursuit of peace by the youngest, most vulnerable members of their society. And that's when it hit me. The best ideas for peace already exist in the minds of locals. There's nothing that I'm going to do as an outsider that's going to bring in some revolutionary idea. In fact, that's what has plagued peace building for so long, is the perpetuation of ideas like the Westerner knows best, neocolonialism, et cetera. For so long, we have had to transition through the ideas that surround, showing poor, vulnerable children with, flies on their forehead as a means to promote our work. But rather, what if we flipped the whole scenario in our head and we said, we as outsiders, we as international actors, want to work to serve your ideas. And that's where hybridity comes in. As my organization progressed, and I was able and fortunate enough to work among more and more local populations around the world, I planned a trip to the DRC for the first time, Democratic Republic of the Congo. And as I was preparing to leave, just like 3 days before I was set to depart, I received an email from these two gentlemen, David and Terry. And they said, "We heard you're coming to the Congo. We'd like to meet with you." And I said, "Well, who are you?" And they said, "Well, we're former child soldiers. We left the militias and launched an organization that is working to help lead other child combatants out of the armed groups here in South Kivu. And we also work to sensitize armed group leaders to have them stop recruiting young people and to encourage young people currently employed in the militias to come out. Will you meet with us?" And I said, "Absolutely. This is great. This sounds awesome. Wonderful. I'll be there." 2 days before I left, I got another call from Terry and David. And they said, "We told the armed group leaders about you. We told them that you're coming, and they want to meet with you too." And I said, "Well, why in the world did you do that?" Because the one thing I had going for me was anonymity, right? And now they all know I'm coming? What was the point of that? They said, "Well, they want to hear your ideas, and they want you to listen to theirs for peace." So, okay. So I hung up the phone and thought about it. And I thought to myself, if I'm not willing to engage those who are engaging in local conflict, where will I ever find answers? So I went. We rented a Land Cruiser, and we got incredibly stuck. Really stuck. Like, we're out in the middle of nowhere, heading out to the bush. The armed groups operate up in those mountains and beyond. And we were driving along the path and hit such a patch of mud that it crippled a four-wheel drive Land Cruiser. And we didn't know what we were going to do, because the walk back was incredibly treacherous, especially through highways that were held by what would be known as highwaymen, people who would take advantage or rob you. We certainly couldn't walk back to the city, which was dozens of miles away. And so we just sort of waited. And then all of a sudden, without anybody saying anything, people just started to appear out of nowhere from both sides. Women in incredibly brightly colored dresses, and men with muck boots, and children just kind of quietly approached us. And without saying much, and certainly without requesting anything, they started to push our vehicle back and forth, back and forth. It rocked, and finally it dislodged itself. And we drove a bit forward, and we thanked them all, and they waved and smiled, and we were on our way. And it occurred to me, in this place that is defined so deeply by the violence that plagues it, to those of us who are outsiders, it's actually populated with some of the most incredibly kind, generous, normal people just like me and you, who have the same desires, the same wants, the same hopes and dreams for their children and their family to be healthy, eat good food, dance, laugh, please God, and die a quiet death at the age of 100, right? And that's when it hit me. I'm not in a different place. I'm just among my fellow humans here. And then we locked our keys in the car. And I was incredibly challenged as to what in the heck we were going to do then, other than smash out the window to a rented Toyota Land Cruiser. And there was a gentleman there who was serving in the military who was kind of ensuring the peace among these meetings. And without saying much of anything, he rammed his bayonet into the window and pried the door open as we got a stick to fish the keys out. And I thought, even those in the military are just here to help me. I'm not a stranger in a foreign land, right? I'm just a person among people. And I should listen to the people and find out how it is that they're desiring peace and what their plans are for their own nation. So we finally made it to the meeting. And it was a success. And I'm here today. So the question is not why hybridity. Scholarship has answered that question. Scholars around the world are saying, we as Western peacemakers, we as internationals, as outsiders, must surrender, submit to the ideas of locals. That's not an argument anymore, nor is it new knowledge. But rather, what we're working on is how do you do hybridity? How do you change the game? How do you think about peace differently, but then enact peace differently? And by peace, I mean peacemaking, peace-building activities. Here are some things that we're trying out, and it's currently working really well, as we're seeing some incredible effects happening in South Kivu as we speak. Armed groups are demobilizing, and they're beginning to reintegrate. First of all, submitting to local ideas. Peace already exists in the minds of the locals, as I've said. We just have to learn how to listen. Re-examine the role of money. The peacemaking industry is absolutely engorged with money, and money is not always the answer. In fact, it's rarely the answer, though it is useful. Incorporate former fighters. They know what it's like to live a life in combat. They know what it's like to desire a life of peace. Listen to them. Amplify women's voices. They live at the nexus of the domestic life and the conflict life. Many of them arm themselves, in fact. And they can be honest with you about the realities of peacemaking ideas. And then measure not by your own indicators, but rather engage locals and say, how are you going to measure peace? What are your indicators for a better life? And then measure your work on that. So what? You're not all in peacemaking, nor should you be. We need people who think about peace in every sphere of our own society, because we experience plenty of conflict here at home. So what can you take away from my talk? Learn how to listen. Learn how to quiet your own notions and your own thoughts about what's best, about what the conflict entails, and about steps for moving forward, and rather put yourself in the shoes of those with whom you're experiencing conflict, or between the two who you see experiencing conflict. The ideas for peace already exist in the minds of those who are experiencing conflict. We just have to learn how to listen. Thank you.